Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first panel discussion for this next wave of the pandemic, where the news you've heard, no doubt, is that there is a vaccine on the way. We're going to be conducting a series of these panel discussions to make sure you have the best and most up-to-date information as you're making decisions about what to do with the vaccine and how that's going to affect, your employment and your time here at Temple Health and Fox Chase Cancer Center. And we hope it'll be valuable to you. We ask that you continue to send us feedback and questions, and we'll keep churning out information as best we can. My name's Jeremy Moore. I am the Senior Director for Communications at Fox Chase Cancer Center and a member of the COVID-19 Communications Task Force. I'm very proud to be joined today by Tony Reed, who is the Chief Medical Officer for the Temple University Health System and one of the key leaders in the COVID vaccine effort here at Temple Health, and also Glenn Rall, who in addition to being Professor and Chief Academic Officer at Fox Chase Cancer Center, is the co-author of Principles of Virology, which is now in its 5th edition and is one of the definitive textbooks in the field. So we're very glad to have both of you here, gentlemen, and we'll just go ahead and get right to it with the questions. Number one, how do we know this vaccine is safe and effective?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, you start, I'll follow.
Perfect. Actually, just as a short preamble to that important question about safety and efficacy here is, this is such a remarkable time in this pandemic. I mean, I've said to other people, at the risk of sounding sort of silly at the front end of this interview, this should be a dancing in the streets kind of moment here, because we are, with the arrival of not just the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, but a number of other ones that are soon behind it, we're beginning to see the end of this pandemic. So it still is going to take multiple months by the time all of us are vaccinated or all of us have immunity. But this is the beginning of the end. And it is such a huge achievement that we were able to develop these vaccines as quickly as we have. And even beyond that, that they are as effective as they are. So the 2 vaccines that are coming out first are the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, 2 different companies that are putting out vaccines that are actually quite similar in terms of their formulation, which I think we talk about in a bit. These vaccines, like anything else, have gone through safety trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. So tens of thousands of people already have received these vaccines. And the news is really, really good. In terms of efficacy, that is, how effective are they? They are 95% effective. That means that the vast, vast majority of people who get these vaccines ultimately have immunity against the SARS coronavirus. In addition to that, they are remarkably safe as well. So the consequences, and we'll talk a little bit about vaccine side effects later, but the consequences are some arm pain, a little bit of feeling a little achy or so, not dissimilar to how you might feel after your annual flu shot. But in terms of any other reported side effects from this, there are none. They are negligible. So in terms of its safety and its efficacy, these vaccines are hard to beat in that way. Tony, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to it, because I agree with everything you said, Dr. Aldi, what I will add to this is there's been a lot of rhetoric out there. There's been a lot of conversation nationally. And when you cull through all of that and you get to what matters, what we're left with is that these were done in a relatively rapid succession. We went from not having anything until having a vaccine that is being widely distributed in 10 months. And so there's going to be a natural concern for how safe is it. What I can tell you from watching the process, from living the process, it went through all of the steps, the phase 1 trials, the phase 2 trials, the phase 3 trials. What happened were that things were done simultaneously and all of the downtime between these phases were eliminated. And so it truly became a story of what can be done when our research organizations, when our pharma manufacturers and others really put their mind to it and regulation and red tape gets out of the way and they're able to let the science lead. And so I'm confident in the safety and the effectiveness of just based on watching it happen and watching the trials go and knowing that all of those essential steps occurred.
Okay, so I think we're ready for our next question. Dr. Reed, you touched on this a little bit in your answer to the safe and effective question, but the development process seemed to move pretty fast. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were told a vaccine would take years. Now we are receiving doses in December, which, as you pointed out, Dr. Reed, is less than a year from the time we declared a pandemic
Yep.
to the vaccine coming. What happened?
The previous record in vaccine from molecule development until FDA approval was 4 years. And so at the beginning of all of this, that's what the anticipation was, is to be able to come up with something that would be effective and would fight and be safe would take that long. What wasn't taken into account was exactly what I said, that we were able to do things simultaneously. We were able to look at both safety and effectiveness together. We were able to get the pharmaceutical manufacturers to partner with each other, get the government to convene people to bring these things together in such a quick line of succession. There was no downtime between the phases. There were no gaps in waiting on responses. There wasn't a lot of bureaucratic red tape and paperwork back and forth that often takes months. And so these were the things that got eliminated in the process, not the numbers of patients in the trial, not the data analysis or any of the other important studies. The other thing that happened was we got lucky. The messenger RNA model that they came up with at the beginning worked. And so had that not worked and they had to start over again, would have been a different story, but it worked. I call it lucky. Glenn may have another name for it, being from the research side of the world, but that's everything lined up. All of the parts came together, and that's how we got here today.
And actually, just a brief addition to Tony's point there, that while the mRNA vaccine strategy is new, and we'll talk about that in a bit, this technology, the idea of using messenger RNA as a platform for vaccine development, has been around for, I think, over a decade. So the urgency of this pandemic and the imperative to get this behind us as quickly as possible, I think, drove the deployment of this technology. But this is not, the mRNA vaccine wasn't something that scientists conceived of when the pandemic began back in February or March. This has been under development for some time now. Not necessarily for the coronavirus, but as long as that technology existed, it was easily adaptable to develop vaccines against corona.
So the next couple of questions deal with information sources. Just ask it directly and as bluntly as we can we trust information from the CDC?
I'm going to start with a simple answer of yes. And what I'm wondering is if in the question CDC, are we talking about the CDC or the FDA? The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, they're kind of at the epicenter of this pandemic. They're the ones that have been giving us the recommendations all along. They are a noble group of scientists. Yes, politics gets in the way once in a while. Yes, they've had their challenges over the last 10 months, but at their core, it is still science at the effort. The FDA, the body that's approving this drug, is releasing the emergency use authorization for this drug. They're a group of scientists from around the country. And so they're not necessarily all employed by the federal government. They're not all necessarily based and sitting in Washington, D.C. And so there are people like you and I who are out in organizations across the country, both academic and clinical, that are looking at this with an independent eye and then weighing in on the readiness for this vaccine, these vaccines, to be used in widespread use.
Glenn, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I think it's important to underscore that this is such a stressful time for all of us, right? I mean, the pandemic has been around for months. We're anxious about the January, February, March, the sort of cold, dark winter months. Everyone's tempers are short. And so frustratingly, this pandemic, not just in our country, but globally, has become a political football, which is really unfortunate. So I completely concur with Tony. The Centers for Disease Control, which is what CDC is, which has been in existence for decades, their job is public health and public safety. And the FDA is a partner with them to make certain that things, information and therapeutics and vaccines are distributed along with education effectively to all of us, to the user population. I think sometimes some of the criticism that these agencies, these federal agencies get beyond the fact that they are often used for political purposes is that it seems sometimes that their advice shifts, right? We're told maybe at the very beginning of the pandemic, don't wear masks. And then all of a sudden we're told now you've got to wear masks. And so it might seem initially that there's a little bit of indecisiveness on their part. And I don't think that's the case. That may be components of this, but I think the circumstances and the situation with respect to the pandemic are changing every single day. And as a consequence, our advice as individual scientists and physicians, but also our advice as collectives, as part of the CDC, the FDA, other agencies throughout the world, have to adapt to the situation that's out there. We all know that right now in Philadelphia, we're in this rather terrifying third wave. That implies that the rules and how we behave are different from how we were behaving in the summer, which was actually relatively calm, still midst of the pandemic, but it was certainly not the kinds of caseloads that we're seeing over the last couple of weeks. And so we have to be adaptable, and these agencies then change their advice accordingly.
So the next question is a related one. Can we trust information from the companies about their own vaccines?
So I can start with this one. So can we trust? I can't answer for everyone who's watching this, right? So do I trust the information that's coming from these vaccine companies? The answer to that's yes, and let me justify why my answer is yes. First of all, they have been extremely upfront, all of the companies, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson or Sanofi, any of the ones that have vaccines in the pipeline have been very transparent and very timely about releasing their data and their evidence. Eventually, these will come under peer review. Some of them actually already have. AstraZeneca has a paper recently published in Lancet, which is exactly the gold standard that I think a lot of scientists are looking for, because in a sense, it's other scientists who review their data and say, this is peer reviewed, I can trust this. Right now, the information that we're getting is coming from the vaccine companies themselves. And so there may be skeptics who say, well, you know, they're in this to make money, they're going to tell us good things, but maybe this is not true. If you think about it from a purely economic perspective, this would be such a suicidal thing for a company to do, to release information that then ultimately doesn't stand the test of peer review. So I think all of us are certainly looking forward to the peer review articles, which might not be coming out for another month or two because that process rolls forward fairly slowly. But I have little doubt that what's seen in those peer-reviewed publications is going to reflect what we've understood and what has been indicated from the companies themselves. So for those reasons, I think me personally feel very, very comfortable about the information that we're getting from these various vaccine developers.
I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is in the drug development process and in FDA review at all phases, it is generally the company's own information that's used in those approval processes. And that's where sometimes they will write their own peer-reviewed articles. Sometimes after they come under FDA review and they get released to market, independent researchers do it. But in the approval process, it generally is their own information, such as this. The principal difference in this vaccine development is the conglomeration that came together across manufacturers and with the federal government in the what's termed Operation Warp Speed. These are people outside of the manufacturer, outside of the company developing the vaccine, helping to coordinate, that have a window of visibility into the process that isn't ordinarily there. And so I look at that as being helpful from the perspective of this question, because it's not just that company themselves bringing their own proprietary data to the FDA. There has been some watchers all along the way. But at the core of the question, every one of the FDA approvals really predominantly relies on the company's own data. And so, yeah, I don't see this as any different than any of the other FDA processes that have happened.
All right, so let's turn to some heavy science questions now. What exactly is messenger RNA? And I hear that it manipulates my DNA, so I shouldn't take it. Is that true?
No, that is not true. So I think in metaphors. So I tried to come up with something that made sense to me. Let's see if this works. So if you envision that messenger RNA is like a recipe, and the recipe is the instructions for how to make dinner. But the recipe itself is just a piece of paper or something that you see online. It itself isn't dinner. Messenger RNA encodes a protein. And that protein, specifically in the case of these vaccines, that particular vaccine contains a messenger RNA that encodes a protein that's called spike. It is a SARS coronavirus protein, just one protein of the probably 15 proteins that this virus encodes. It's just one protein, but that protein is going to be sufficient to induce a host immune response, right? So that when you make this protein, the spike protein, your body will recognize this as a foreign agent. It will make an immune response to it. And that immune response is what's going to be providing you protection in case you encounter the actual virus out in the real world. The messenger RNA is delivered in a small little lipid droplet, like a little fat globule, and it's injected into your arm. And what happens is that cells around the site of injection will pick up the recipe and will make dinner. That is, they'll pick up the messenger RNA and they'll create or they'll synthesize the spike protein. That spike protein will then be released, your immune response will be generated, and this is what provides vaccine protection. At no point does this messenger RNA get anywhere near the cellular DNA. The cellular DNA is actually kept within the nucleus of the cell. And so I understand that there are questions about this vaccine approach because it is new. And it does require a little bit of an understanding of nucleic acids and proteins and immunology. So it's understandable that there might be some questions about this. But that vaccine RNA is probably degraded. It's very fragile. So it's probably going to degrade within 24 or 48 hours after the injection. There's no chance for it to do anything nefarious to your cellular DNA. It's just going to be local. It's just going to be, in a sense, the match that lights the fire that ultimately results in a protective host immune response on your behalf. How is that as a metaphor?
I think that's a fantastic answer and a great metaphor. The only thing I'll add is we, the human organism, are a composite of DNA. The DNA in itself doesn't do anything. The DNA has to have our own homegrown, self-built messenger RNA to tell our cells to do something. And so that's what messenger RNA is. It's the messenger that connects, in natural, from inside of us, it connects our DNA to our proteins, our ribosomes, our cellular material that makes us up. In this case, what they're doing is taking a messenger RNA, injecting it via the vaccine to tell the body to create that protein. And that protein just happens to be a mirror image of a protein that's in the virus. So it's not the virus itself, but it's a protein that's one component of the virus that then tells the body how to fight against the virus. And so it's a messenger. It doesn't go backwards. It doesn't become part of the DNA. It doesn't go the other direction. Because we have a diverse crowd, the other analogy that's out there, think of it in terms of it's the software that tells your computer what to do. Or, think of having a robotic arm sitting on your desk that you want it to pick up a pen. You have two ways of doing that. You can either actually manually move the robotic arm with your hands and cause it to pick up the pen and move it, or you can type a software program to tell the robotic arm to move and to pick up the pen. And that's what messenger RNA is that software that's telling it to do that. So you get two different analogies now for two different groups in the crowd, and hopefully that helps.
Definitely. Turning back to the process and politics of it all, are the vaccines FDA approved? And what does emergency authorization mean?
Yep, and you heard me correct myself earlier, and I used the word approval, and that's not the right word. FDA approval is their final stamp, their seal of approval at the end of all studies, and then it goes out and it becomes, an official drug on the market and can be used. In this case, an emergency use authorization, an EUA, is what's being issued. When they issue that, it's because they're trying to get something to market faster than what the final timeline would be on the study. And so in this case, we've enrolled a large number of people in the vaccine trials. They've been following these people in the trials for about 4 months out of what will ultimately become 20 months or longer of following. There's been enough information given in the safety and the efficacy and the appropriateness of use that the FDA feels comfortable saying we need to get this to more people than just those who would be involved in the trials. They're so confident in this that they believe that it should not be held back, that it should not be in reserve, that it should not be a select group, but it should be available to everyone. That's what an emergency use authorization is. The trials will continue on and we'll get the final data on the vaccine. And what those will show us, the data that we don't know right now, is how long we remain immune. So if you get vaccinated today, how long does that immunity last? I can't tell you. That's going to be what comes out in the rest of the trials. Is it safe? Yes, I can tell you that. Does it work? Yes, I can tell you that. It's the length of time that's in the difference of these trials. The example I'll give, remdesivir, monoclonal antibodies, all of the treatments that we've been using in the hospital and now starting to use at home, they're all emergency use authorization drugs as well. They're ones that the government, the FDA, and others realized needed to be on the market quickly in order to effectively fight this disease. And so it's into that same bucket and same category as those.
Glenn, anything to add to that? Or?
No, you'll be happy to know. I think Tony got that 100% right. Nothing extra to add for that question.
Well, that's great. Then let's turn to a broad question, and maybe as we think about this question, either one of you can comment on some of the breaking news we saw today about recommendations about allergies under this umbrella. What are the side effects of vaccines like this?
So I can launch into it and then we'll see what Tony's got. So I mentioned the only side effects that are broadly reported for recipients of these vaccines is arm pain, just a little bit of soreness around the arm, tenderness around the arm, similar to any vaccine or any injection that you would get. And then probably within 12 to 18 hours after you've gotten the vaccine, you won't feel swell. You'll wake up, maybe if you've got the vaccine in the morning, you'll wake up in the middle of the night and you'll have some body aches. You might have a low-grade fever. Nothing that, a couple of Aleve or Motrin won't handle, and it's short-lived. And in fact, even though it might wake you up and that might be frustrating and disruptive, it's actually good news, because why you don't feel well is that's your body's immune response. That means that the vaccine has worked. That means that your body has recognized the spike protein that we just talked about as foreign and is now producing molecules called cytokines. It's producing these soluble proteins that are causing you to feel not so swell. This all abates in the vast majority of vaccine recipients within a day or so. After which you are presumably now protected. Remember, this is a 2-dose, the RNA vaccines are a 2-dose regimen. So you are vaccinated, then there's a period of, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks, and then you receive your second, exactly the same, you receive your second vaccine that cements the immune memory against the SARS coronavirus. So those are the side effects that we know about. I think a lot of people have questions or concerns about what else these vaccines might induce or might cause. And I don't want to be, glib here, that there are people who've had reactions to other vaccines. Other vaccines, for example, the influenza virus vaccine is made in eggs, so people who have egg allergies might end up having a response. There are preservatives in other vaccines that on an individual basis could induce some sort of allergic reaction. To the best of my understanding, and Tony, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but to the best of my understanding, these RNA vaccines are preservative free. You may have heard that they need to be kept extraordinarily cold, especially the Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept at minus 80 degrees Celsius. Well, that's because there aren't preservatives in here. As soon as you thaw it, you have a very limited period of time between thawing that vaccine and giving the injection into a recipient, because these things don't contain much else other than the RNA, the little lipid capsid or the little lipid particle in which the RNA is bound, and some salts and sugars just to keep the pH stabilized. But to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing else that might evoke an allergic reaction in these. So, Tony?
Yeah, no, I think Glenn nailed it. The common reactions that we're hearing about, muscle aches, body aches, low-grade fever, headaches. I think Dr. Ross said it best. You wake up the next morning, you won't feel swell. You'll feel a little achy and sore. It does not mean you have the virus. It is your body's effect in creating virus-fighting cells. And so that's what we're planning to tell people. When it comes to what goes into the fact sheet that goes with it, we do not know yet what the US FDA is going to put into the fact sheet that goes, the equivalent of the vaccine information sheet for those familiar. What we see from the United Kingdom, they made a comment about pregnancy, they made a comment about allergies. The UK tends to be more of the nature that if the data is not known, their recommendations tend to go against. In the US, we're more pragmatic about it. We take a look at it and say, if the information is not known, it's not known. And so you'll see some stuff come out in the fact sheet around those kind of things. Allergies is the most recent one that was released today, that the fact sheet may say it's not known whether you're going to be at risk if you have a history of an allergic reaction to a vaccine or not. Glenn hit the nail on the head. It's a different type of vaccine. There is no preservative. There is no reason to suspect that you will have an issue if you've had an issue with a prior vaccine like the flu shot. That's what we're waiting to see from the FDA from their review. That's what we're waiting to see with the manufacturer's information to come out. And as we get that information, we're going to release it to everyone in terms of what's in the data. What does it say? What should I do for me personally?
Great. So getting to the more personal questions now, I know a vaccine isn't treatment, but if I take a vaccine, does that mean I can take my mask off, go visit my grandmother, and go back to life as normal? I mean, I think there's a lot of anxiety around this question. what can we do after we get a vaccine? What can we still not do?
It's going to take us some time to get to a point where we can say that's an okay thing to do. There's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, the vaccine doesn't work immediately. It's at least 7 days till you start to see the appropriate immune response. You'd need the second dose to have enough booster to create a thorough immune response. You may still harbor the virus for a period of time with that. And so what you'll see in our recommendations, what you'll see in the federal recommendations is that we still be cognizant, we still be protective. We wear the mask, we keep our social distance, we don't expose people unnecessarily. And that's going to continue for a few months as we work our way through first healthcare workers, and then those in post-acute facilities like nursing homes, and then those who are high risk, and then the general population. That's about a 6-month process to get through everybody to get to that point where we can comfortably say we've vaccinated enough people that we've gotten control of this virus.
Yep, I agree. I mean, I look at this question and I mean, who can't hope that that happens tomorrow, right? Being able to spend time with people that you love that maybe you haven't seen for months, and you know, whatever life was like beforehand, being able to go to concerts and being able to spend time with friends inside, that just sounds like, you know, paradise. And it's not far. But this doesn't mean that because you got a vaccine, you now have a superpower and you can take off your mask and go about your business. Tony is completely right on this. Nothing is going to look that different once we start vaccinating. Everyone within the health system is still going to be asked to wear masks, even if you got vaccinated, because it's cautious, it's prudent. As Tony pointed out, sometimes vaccines don't take as well. You need to make certain that you get that second dose. That's really important, that you don't just say, well, I had one, I got my vaccine, you know, my arm hurt a little bit, and that was unpleasant. It's really imperative that you get that second dose, because that's when you know that you've gotten the full scope of the benefit of the vaccine. But it's not far to be able to do those things, right? And it depends on all of us being part of this process so that the vast majority of individuals within, you know, Philadelphia, within the health system, within our own family and friends network are vaccinated, that this will then be the demise of this virus and this pandemic, or if not the demise, the control that will allow us to get back to normal.
And then a final question. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are getting a lot of attention, but what other vaccines are in development? Did they use mechanisms other than messenger RNA?
Right. So I think that's maybe the best part of all of this, right? Is that, like, I think humanity can pat themselves on the back. I'd be a little bit nervous if there was just one company that developed a vaccine and that's all that we humanity, you know, worldwide had access to. Because if you think about it, just in the United States alone, there are over, 335 million people. So just think about the logistics of making enough of this vaccine to immunize all of us. And some of these vaccines are 2 doses, right? So that's 335 times 2 is the number of doses that you would need if it was just one company that was making them. And that doesn't even factor in the number of little glass ampules and the number of syringes and the mechanism by which these vaccines get distributed to your primary care physician or to the health system or to CVS. So it is great news that there are multiple other vaccines that are coming through. The ones that we're talking about today are the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna, because those are the first 2 out of the gate. But I guarantee you that either right around the holidays or soon after the new year, you're going to start to hear about ones such as AstraZeneca, for example, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And they're different. These are not messenger RNA-based vaccines. These are different, yet again, and perhaps we'll do another session in which we can come up with another dumb analogy for those in those cases. But those vaccines actually have some benefits to them. They may be a little bit behind the RNA-based vaccines, but some of those might be single-dose vaccines. And some of those don't have the restrictions of being kept at, at minus 80 degrees Celsius. And that's great news, because if this vaccine is going to be deployed across the planet, in regions of the world in which electricity and therefore refrigeration are not as dependable as they might be here, vaccines like AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines may be the ones that are going to be most important for protecting folks in developing countries, for example. So there's going to be this array of vaccines that are available, and all of them are going to be coming due or coming through that FDA process that Tony described in the next weeks and months.
The only thing that I will add is the Johnson & Johnson, otherwise known as the J&J Janssen vaccine. We are principal investigators in that. Dr. Nina Gentile from the Department of Emergency Medicine has a site here, and it is an ongoing trial called the Ensemble trial. Single dose, it's refrigerated temperature as opposed to -80, and those numbers are looking just as good as the Pfizer and the Moderna numbers. The expectation is they'll be filing for an EUA by the end of the calendar year if things go as they're currently anticipated. And so Temple has a hand in helping to create this solution to the problem.
Great. Well, gentlemen, that wraps up the questions that we had. I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and give you an opportunity to make any concluding comments you want. Glenn, we'll do you, and then Tony.
Sure. So stay vigilant. I know you're sick of wearing masks and of all of the restrictions, but here's my mask. Stay on top of this, because part of the reason why we're seeing this third wave, it's attributable to a lot of factors. But I think some of it is that folks are getting tired of this. And just because you're sick of the coronavirus doesn't mean it's finished with you, right? This is not something that you can, just dismiss like a person that annoys you and just ignore it. It still is very much out there, more than it was ever before. So you stay vigilant, and also be ambassadors for vigilance about mask wearing and distancing and all the things that you know about, you've heard, countless times. But also, if you are positive about the vaccine, if this is something that you're enthusiastic to get, talk with other people. And if they have questions or concerns, listen to them. Don't just lecture to them, but say, well, what are your worries? What are your concerns? And do some research so that you can educate them. Right? The way in which we're going to move forward as a society is by all of us working together and educating each other, similar to what Tony and I and Jeremy hoped that we were able to do today. So be ambassadors and be advocates for getting us quickly to the end of this pandemic.
Tony?
Yeah, and what I'll say is, first of all, thank you. If you've made it this far into the video, I thank you for your time and for your patience and for listening to this. There's a lot of great information. The team that's put this together, I can't thank them enough for doing all of the work to create these kind of communication channels to get the information out. I want to echo what Glenn said about the vigilance. I heard a story this morning of a young lady who had gotten together with her family for Thanksgiving and was lamenting. It was just a small gathering. It was her sister and brother-in-law, their parents, and a couple of kids who had come with them. And she had been tested negative before Thanksgiving. Nobody seemed to have any symptoms. And now afterwards, her dad has COVID. And she can't understand where it came from or how it got there. And my answer was, you've been tested, but the tests are only so good. Your parents may or may not have been tested, and there is an asymptomatic period to this. The remaining vigilant, the continuing with masks, the social distancing, particularly as we're coming into the holidays here, is going to be what gets us through. The vaccine is not going to work immediately, but it will help tremendously. And I think we're in the final few months of what's a pandemic lockdown, horrible year. But at the same time, we don't want to let our guard down now. We don't want bad things to happen. We don't want the numbers to continue to rise while we're so close to the beginning of the end. And so that's my urging to you is to remain vigilant, to keep the mask on, to keep the distance, and to stay the course on what we've been doing. And I thank everybody for all of the work you've been doing for our patients, for our community, and for the betterment of Temple and Fox Chase.
Well, thank you both. I don't have anything substantive to improve on those closing remarks, so I will just say thank you to Dr. Rall and Dr. Reed for their time this afternoon. Thanks to all of you for listening, and stay tuned. We'll be back with another video very soon dealing with these issues and some others as the vaccine continues to roll out. Thank you, everybody.